back in the studio. Let's continue with our next panel discussion. We're going to dive deep into the reality of ad monetization work. Let's welcome our next speakers. Zackaria Ben Moussa, Head of UA and Monetization at Ketchapp. Andrei Luzan, Head of Monetization at APPSULOVE, and the moderator of the session, Tchernahovsky, Managing Director EMEA at AppLovin. Hello, guys.
Hey, how's it going?
Hello.
Hi everyone.
Good to have you here in the studio.
Thank you. It's a
What
pleasure.
about you guys? Have you been to Amsterdam?
It's been a while. Couple times when I was younger.
Last time was actually for White Nights. I think that's a while back.
Yeah, feels like ages ago.
Yes.
And where are you based now? All of you, I mean.
Paris for me.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I am located in Minsk.
And I'm in Berlin right now.
Wow, so international. Well, thank you very much for joining us today in this beautiful city. And we're very excited to have you here speak. Over to you.
Perfect. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, so thanks everyone for tuning in. As I said, we're going to talk about the realities of the monetization life and the monetization work today. The idea is that we're going to dive a little bit deeper into what the actual day-to-day looks like, what numbers you look at, and what the purpose of monetization really is and how you can benefit from it. So to start off, maybe you two can introduce yourself a little bit and talk a little bit about your companies and what you do there. Maybe Zach, you can kick us off.
Yes, thanks, Daniel. Hi everyone. I'm Zackaria. I'm head of UA and monetization for Ketchapp. We are publishing hyper-casual apps since like 6 years now, something like that. I'm in charge of all revenue, attribution, data, and of course, monetization.
Cool, thanks.
Okay, now, hi everyone. I'll tell a little bit about myself. My name is Andrei, and I work as a head of monetization for APPSULOVE. We are a mobile developer from Belarus, and we are creating mobile games. And right now, our biggest and I think the most famous game is Numberzilla. It's a number puzzle game. So yeah, I'm responsible for everything about that monetization. We'll speak about that.
Perfect. All right. Thanks so much. So I think it's interesting to see that you guys work in two kind of different businesses, like obviously both are ad monetized, but they have very different portfolios. Maybe you can both speak a little bit to how many games there are and what type of games they are and how they monetize, and maybe name a few of your most famous ones.
Well, that's true. It's quite large. With Ketchapp, we are monetizing, working on more than 150 apps on a daily basis. Our biggest titles are 2048, Knife Eat, Rider, Balls, Origami, Bike Rush. So it's quite large. We have a lot of work, especially in monetization, quite a lot of DAUs. So yes, it's very exciting.
Yeah, and we are a little bit different from this side. Obviously, we also have a lot of apps in our portfolio, about 20 apps, and we try to concentrate on a couple of big projects at the moment. So it's not that many as in Ketchapp, but we try to be granular in our work, so it's also a lot of optimizations day to day.
I see. So, Andrei, for example, with your games, the monetization is not just purely ad-driven, right? So maybe you can tell us a little bit about the monetization constructs that you have in Numberzilla, for example, as a game.
Okay, yeah. Right now, we are using the hybrid monetization model in our apps, and we try to split revenue between in-app purchases and ads, and we try to maximize performance from both sides. And from our side, we are working on ads, and we also have a team that is working on in-app purchases, creating promo materials and trying to make our users to make purchases in our games. Yeah, and
gotcha.
Yeah.
So could you, for example, could you give us a rough estimate of what percentage for both of your companies, what percentage of revenue is coming from ads?
So right now, well, Numberzilla was historically a more ad-oriented app, and at certain times we had about 80% of revenue generated by ads. Right now we balanced it out a little bit, and right now it's pretty equal split between IAPs and ads. It's about 50-50. But yeah, we had to walk a long road to this balance.
On our side at Ketchapp, we rely mostly on ad monetization. About 95% of our revenue stream is coming from ads.
Okay, understood. So in both of your cases, I guess for the, let's say, the optimization, the work that goes into monetization is pretty definitive for your business as a whole. So generally, I think there are always two parts that people talk about. One is like how to integrate ads, and then the other one is how to monetize the inventory that you have, right? So maybe as a first step, you guys can talk a little bit about just the integration part, which ad formats you use, why you use them, etc.
Okay, yeah, I can start here. So I think we have a pretty traditional approach to ad monetization in terms of ad formats. We use small banners and interstitials and rewarded videos, obviously. And we try to integrate them so that they won't interfere with user experience in our apps, and so that all ad formats were natively integrated into the flow of the user experience, and to give certain advantage for users who are, for example, watching rewarded videos rather than not watching them.
On our side, ad placements are managed by the publishing and internal team at Ketchapp. So actually, the concept is to have engagement for user and user-friendly approach for them. So it means we will try to provide some element like rewarded videos are used to engage users. Banners are there for ongoing forever because it's like regular. And interstitial also are integrated in a manner of not frustrating too much the user.
And
yep.
Okay, so then the next point is, let's say you have your integration set. You know you want to use banners, you want to use interstitials, you want to use rewarded. Now, obviously, that's quite a job to do, right? There's a lot to be managed. So maybe you guys can just for the viewers or the listeners to have a better idea of what the reality of this is. Take us through, let's say, a normal morning. You wake up. Once you start working, what are the first things you look at?
Okay, yeah, I can start with that too. So basically right now I'm head of monetization, so I don't do much of managing waterfalls by myself. But normally for an administration manager, the morning would be, first of all, you have to check that everything works correctly with your ad networks, that all the reporting is okay, that nothing is broken on the attribution side. So you're checking that your stats are being grabbed correctly. So then you check your basically all the basic monetization metrics like eCPM, fill rate, the ARPDAU. So you take a look at that, you make sure that everything is pretty stable, and then you get into the optimization process itself. So you start looking for the areas where you can make your performance a little bit better. So you're trying to be as granular as possible. You're looking at the performance by geo, performance by ad format, performance by ad network. So you're analyzing everything and looking for the weak spots so that you could enhance the performance in there and find where you can grow your, say, overall fill rate or overall eCPM. So something like this.
Yes, I'm happy to hear that I'm not alone in the same routine. Yes, you're totally true, Andrei. What we have to do is first is to make sure our data is reliable. That is very important. And then when we are 100% sure there is no broken data source or something like that, then we can take a deep look to our like regular metrics. As I have a lot of apps, I cannot look at every single apps, but I look like at the big pictures first. And actually the first metrics would be like eCPM, AppDAO, basically. It's like checking my vital signals on a daily basis just to make sure everything is correct. And then after that, we can manage to find some issues. We can start to take decision, see what we're about to do during the day.
Understood. So, okay, so you guys had mentioned two metrics that I think are quite common in industry. Maybe just explain for the listeners of yours who haven't heard of these before. So what is the ARPDAO? And then, which I think is more of a higher level metric. And going a slightly bit deeper, the fill rate is something that I think you hear a lot. Can you maybe talk a little bit about why the fill rate is an important metric to look at?
Sure. Actually, AppDAO is average revenue per daily active user. Every day you have a limited number of users, so your daily active user, and you generate some revenue at the end of the day. So actually, AppDAO, it's pretty simple. It's just a division, like how much revenue per in average per daily active user. Fill rate, it's pretty important too, because actually your DAUs are able to generate a limited number of ads during the day. But in fact, there is so many more ad requests that are generated by all these users. Every time they start an app, there is some few ad requests, and with all the waterfall and building things, you need to sell each ad. You need to display an ad to a user. Fill rate is actually what makes you understand how many ads are correctly served. Did I serve as much as ads as possible during the day? Mm-hmm. And it's really important because it really depends on the CPM, how much you want from the ads you want to sell. And if you are too angry, if you want to sell it like at a high price point, then you risk to have a low fill rate because advertiser won't be able to bid in your waterfall and won't buy your inventory because it's too expensive. So actually, fill rate is how you manage the sweet spot where your average CPM, like globally, is optimized and maximized on the market.
Understood. Andrei, how about you? You said that fill rate is one of the things that within a waterfall you'd be looking at. So maybe you can take us through what the number means to you and how you use it for optimizations.
Yeah, sure. I absolutely agree with Doug that this is a very important metric to take a look at because it's actually an answer from each network for each line item that you're managing. Whether you have actually found that sweet spot with the eCPM floor to make sure that price you're asking for this certain ad impression is okay with your demand provider, and that you are actually able to serve this impression for this price point. So I would say that generally fill rate is something that shows you how much ads you can actually serve being compared to the quantity of ad requests you have sent and to the quantity of ad impressions you are actually serving. So this is like your balance of ads. This is quantity of ads you're possibly can show. So this is very important to understand that you're asking the right price point. You're not asking too much or not too low, because if you have like too high fill rate, you're probably not doing it right, because you can probably ask a higher price for your impressions, and you should increase your price floors.
Understood.
Definitely. I would just add something about fill rates now. This market is evolving and there is more and more bidders in our waterfall. And this is quite changing the fill rate and how we approach that. Obviously, bidders are like having receiving a lot of ad requests. So we have to take this into account because bidders and regular waterfall players are not having the same fill rate and the same conclusion about it.
Exactly. Maybe just to add a little bit of context here for folks who aren't quite familiar with this hybrid model. So a hybrid waterfall essentially is where you have in-app bidders, Facebook being one, AppLovin maybe being another one, and then you have non-bidders, maybe let's say someone like Unity or Google, who are set up in a waterfall with price points, right? So you have a bidder. A bidder essentially is just asked, what's the highest price point that you're willing to pay for this request? And then you have a waterfall in which you say, well, Google, are you willing to pay $100? If they say no, then you ask maybe Unity, are you willing to pay $90, and so on and so forth. And the combination of these two is a hybrid waterfall. In Max and our own mediation, for example, we use it quite actively. We're a pretty big part of the impressions is transaction for bidders. And for the rest, you need the waterfall. And that's precisely where you then start looking into these fill rates. So let's take the next step. Okay, so you guys, you've done your morning analysis. You've seen today is a good day. My BI is working. I got all my network data by the APIs. Nothing is broken. You take a deep breath. Now you've analyzed the numbers, and now there's this next step, right? So now you've had a look, and now you want to action on it, right? So how do you take action? Let's say if we start talking about monetization optimizations, oftentimes what you hear is waterfall optimizations, right? So what's your approach to this, and what's, let's say, the next step for you guys?
Okay, yeah, if you don't mind, I'll start. So I would say that as we have already spoken about the fill rate, I would basically take a look at my waterfalls, at all the line items and the stats for them. And I would take a look at the basically two metrics. That would be eCPM, the actual eCPM that I'm having for those line items for the previous days, and the fill rate for each of those line items to make sure that I am earning as much as possible for each of my line items in the waterfall. And I would take a look at where I would say that I have certain thresholds for fill rate for certain parts of my waterfall, being divided into, say, top tier of the waterfall, middle, and the bottom. And let's say we have certain benchmarks for the fill rate for each of these parts of the waterfall. And I would compare the average fill rate for the certain line item to this benchmark. And if it's too low, I will probably decrease the price floor for this line item. If it's too high, I will probably set a higher price floor. But this is like the general approach. Certainly, there is some differences regarding these line items, depending on how much revenue they generate. For example, if I see that one line item generates more than, say, 5 or 10% of my total revenue per waterfall, I would be more attentive to it, and to move it, you have to be precisely sure that you are doing it in the right direction. Yeah, and this is where actually you need to run A/B tests to make sure that you are doing an informed decision. And yeah, this is all very connected. So you decide what you want to test, and then you test it, and then you make your decision.
Yes, definitely, I agree. What matters the most here is to make sure all the instances are correctly filling and are generating value to my waterfall. If it doesn't bring enough value for certain geos at certain granularity, of course, overall it's very complicated to look at these numbers. So we have to focus first on like top tier or middle tier or bottom or whatever, as long as you have enough DAUs on your waterfall. When you have enough DAUs, then you can rely on the data you get. You can understand that, okay, my fill rate here is up to my benchmark, so that's fine. And then you can see if there is like blocks in your waterfall. If you drop, like if some instances are not bidding or not buying anything, they're just receiving ad request, then you can ask yourself if you should do something. And what's happened is there is two solutions on that. Of course, you can disable a weak line item, or you can contact your account manager and try to find out if there is any solution on this. Because sometimes it's just an issue with how they plug some demands on these instances, how the CPM, the floor is set on the site, or it could be like simply a technical error because you didn't update the latest SDK or for some reason. So first, I will ask my account manager first to understand. Then if it's because of the demand on this specific instance, then I will proceed to, I will take a decision to do a test and see, okay, what happens if we change the position of this instance to another position, and then I could use A/B test to see if it's going to generate some uplift or not. That actually, like one example was kind of optimization, but in fact, it's more like geos instances. All the instances are generating value. If not, then I would try to innovate, see what we can do, maybe change some floors, ask a new network if they want to bid higher to take this position, etc. It's kind of bargain with your network. You need to ask and be demanding, because most of the time you fix waterfall issues just by speaking with your account managers.
Understood. So yes, I mean, I've been working in this industry for 5 years, and a lot of it in the initial was precisely that, right? It's the conversation you have with your publishers as to change this price point, add another call, do all these things, maybe increase demand if possible. But the one thing that always stuck out to me was that sometimes it's hard to follow, or it used to be hard to follow up on what these changes actually yielded. So you guys both have spoken about A/B tests. That is something that we, for example, in Max, see used all the time. But it's also to some extent a new feature or a new tool that now exists in the mediation scene, or at least in our mediation. So maybe you guys can talk a bit about why the tool matters and what it changes for you in comparison to how you had to run it in the old days.
Yes, of course, of course. A/B tests are definitely a very nice feature and a must-have feature for our mediation platform today. We are generating too much impression, a lot of complexity in the waterfall, a lot of apps, but when you multiply this by ad format, bidding, non-bidding waterfall, you need to have a simple tool to measure if what you experiment works or not, if it generates value for you or not, and also to understand where is the value generated by your experiments. Mm-hmm. So it's definitely something that you must do to understand the possibilities of your inventory.
Understood. Andrei, do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I would just add that before this tool was, say, invented, it was very hard to actually measure the influence of your optimization on the waterfall, because you had to find some generic metrics to measure the performance of your waterfall before your optimization, and then you had to wait certain time after you made optimizations to wait while the ad network algorithms would like teach themselves how to perform correctly. So we had to wait, say, for a week or something like this before you could measure the actual effect of your optimizations, and it took a lot of time and a lot of effort to calculate it by hand. So yeah, this feature actually helps you to see the result very fast and very precisely, the difference how your waterfall performs before. Even though, that you can split your actual DAUs in halves, and you can see how your previous waterfall performs and how your new waterfall performs, and it's very simple and effective to compare them.
Yeah. So, oh, sorry.
Just to add something, like you're true, it was really time consuming and required a lot of effort before the rise of A/B test tool on Mediation. Now it's much better. We don't have to create new instances or create new full waterfall to test, and avoid to have data merging from one instances to one A/B test. It's like super easy, and yes, it's a great step forward to have like this easy test tool.
Absolutely. I mean, this is I remember the feedback that I often gotten when when you reach out to a publisher and you say, well, we're performing really well at $25. We have great fun. You add another core at 30. And this is a very typical conversation that I think every monetization manager in the world has heard from every network in the world. And then the feedback that you sometimes get is, hey, this was great for my ARPDAU. And the feedback that you sometimes gotten was, you know what, I can't really tell. Right, because maybe one network takes more impressions, the other one takes less, and it's kind of hard to tell what it does for an ARPDAU. And I think it's some of the frustration that I've often heard from partners before, which was, I'm doing things, but I don't know how impactful they are. Obviously, the clear winners, the 10% uplifts you'll see, but over time, I think as you optimize your waterfalls, there aren't that many 10% winners. They're the 1 or 2% winners, and those I think have been always hard to figure out otherwise. So let's say now that you have this tool available, now that you can run these A/B tests, how big of a part of, let's say, your day-to-day work is it? I mean, how often do you run tests, for example?
Okay, so I would say that right now A/B testing became like the biggest part of daily routine of administration manager, because as we already have this tool, we try to use it as much as possible. And as right now, we are able to see the results in a day, sometimes in a couple of hours, if it is a test with bidding partners. So you don't have to wait for a week to run another A/B test. So we are usually doing almost like a test each day of the week. So it may be 5 or even more tests per week. So yeah, it's a very important part of daily routine, because the optimization became a continuous process. And as you said, that usually you receive just 1% profit from your optimizations. And as we can do tests every day, we can get this 1% each day, and it makes a huge difference for us.
Yes, that's true. That's true. Same at Ketchapp. Our monetization managers running A/B tests on a daily basis. It's an ongoing process. We run tests like every day, and what's happened is we usually do like test based on some focus we do. For example, we try to increase, to boost like the tier 1 specifically. So we will do some experiments. Then 24 hours, we get some result. We see what worked, what didn't work. We try to keep only what worked, because actually it's not super easy just to see like with the big picture. It's super easy to say, oh, okay, I made 3% more. But in fact, you made 6% on certain geos, minus 2% on other one, and few other examples like that. And at the end, you win, but you won, but it's still not optimal. So that's why we have to do it on a daily basis, and it's still an ongoing, because sometimes you win on several geos and several ad format, but not for the other one. So then you keep the existing setup for what's worked, and then you take the other one which didn't work, and you adapt your tests in order to get result.
I understand. Maybe just a follow-up here, because I'm super curious about this. Like you guys are managing, as you said, 150 games. Like, how do you do that? Because I mean, I remember having like 20 clients with like a couple games each, and I was completely overwhelmed with that. Like, how do you guys have this many games to manage? Like, how do you go about that?
Hopefully, even if we have 150 apps, not all of them have large DAU base. So we first focus on our top 50 apps that we work on it like on daily or even weekly basis. And the other part would be more like every 2 weeks, or we just iterate what we've learned on the experiments we are doing on a daily basis. And every quick win we can enable on this app will be pasted on the rest of the apps.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not easy. We need tools. We need to spend time. We need to get focused and go to what will have the biggest impact. So of course, we won't be able to manage the T4, the tier 4 for an app which has 200 DAUs, of course. But we try to group as much as possible, find the sweet spot everywhere, and then measure essentially what we've been doing.
Understood. So you guys both mentioned a word which I found interesting, which is the word of impact, right? So what is impact to you? So obviously, in the long run, you want to increase your LTV, but you've kind of said, you know, these 2 or 3 or 4% increases that you can get. Can you just, or maybe Andrei, can you take us through what metric do you look at? What's the KPI that you look at to understand the impact of these tests?
Well, I would say that I want to take a step back and talk about impact generally, because, well, of course, you can optimize your waterfall, and it's very important to do. But I would say that the biggest impact that I've seen to do is the work with the product itself. That you can increase your ARPDAU by 40% just by optimizing the quantity of impressions per user. And this is very important to do also. So this is the other part that is, I would say it's more connected to the product part of any app. And it isn't that much connected with the, say, mediation platform. But yeah, you shouldn't forget about that. And in terms of waterfalls and the impact, yeah, I would say that the ARPDAU is the like the universal metric that you try to increase. And the only thing I would add that we try to be granular and take a look at the ARPDAU per, say, per ad format, per certain geos, so that we could understand what we can improve and where we can find some more to grow. So it's important to compare the share of certain ad format in your stack, share of certain geos in your stack, so that you could understand where you can have the biggest impact. So instead of, for example, improving the performance of banners that are generally having a lower eCPMs, you would concentrate on improving your rewarded waterfall, so that the overall impact would be bigger.
Understood. So if we take, let's say, a game like Numberzilla, obviously the game has developed vastly since it was released, but if we just talk, let's say, about the ad LTV, could you maybe talk us a little bit through a range, for example, what have all these A/B tests and all these waterfall optimizations or product optimization, what have they yielded in terms of, let's say, the ad LTV over time?
Oh, it's hard to say. Well, as I have already said, that working with product makes the greatest impact. So the greatest profit in terms of revenue we had after optimizing our ad impressions per active users. So it has increased the overall ARPDAU more than 50%.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that the overall waterfall optimization have given us about 20 to 30% of increase in ad revenue from just optimizing the waterfalls.
Understood. I mean, this especially now that, let's say, the business is incredibly UA driven. I think for both of your companies, essentially you're driving a big part of the users by UA. These 20-30% you can transfer, the 50% before, you can obviously translate them into CPI right away, and therefore get more sustainability. So these numbers are really great to hear. I think that should be super motivating for everyone who is working on monetization as to what the capabilities are. As we kind of now start talking a bit about UA as well, we have the fortune, Zach, you not only run monetization, but you also run UA. Can you just give us a very brief overview of, let's say, the work that you guys do on the UA side? How many networks you work with, how you handle that part of your day?
Okay. At Ketchapp, we're currently being like 20 apps. We are doing UA, we are pushing UA on a daily basis at a different scale. And we used to work with like 15 networks, and depend on the game, of course. Some requires more networks than others. So, yep.
I understood. Okay, and so your UA strategy is obviously, I think, for every network differently. I know obviously someone like Facebook, you run campaigns with some other networks, you have source level granularity. So maybe can you take us a little bit through the typical tasks that you have with these? I'd say there are these two types of networks, right?
Yes, definitely. We are able to track a lot of things with our measurement partners. That's very interesting because we can get a very detailed granularity. With performance networks, some of them allow us to do UA and measure ROS at the source level. That's very interesting. The other one are more aggregated. We have the data, we are able to know a few elements, but it's not very accurate compared to the deepest granularity we have at the moment. So some networks offer these features, and it really helps because some ROS optimizer tools are able to leverage a campaign performance like at a very fast pace. You can easily target, you can easily give some ROS target, and the network optimizer tool will do the job, and it will test a lot of different sources, bid differently accordingly to the performance, and that's very impactful.
So you just mentioned ROS, so return on ad spend. It's essentially, let's say, the ROI of your UA activities. When you speak about ROS tools, what do you mean by that? How does that work?
When you are doing UA, what matters the most is obviously the benefit of it, what the LTV generated by the user you acquire on a daily basis. So actually, you can predict user behavior, user LTV. So this means you have a kind of path of ROS at D4, at D3, ROS should be like 30%, at D7, it should be 80%, whatever. So you are able to give ROS target to your network. There is very few networks with ROS optimizer. And then they will manage to bid accordingly to the ROS from the source. So it means you are not now bidding and acquiring users like based on average values. For example, you know that your LTVs for your game in the US is 80 cents. But in fact, it's an average. Some users coming from specific sources have much higher LTV compared to others with a very low LTV. Then you are able to say that some sources, you're able to define that some sources are more profitable than others. So what actually does the ROS optimizer is to look at the result, see if your ROS is strong or not, and then make sure you are bidding on these sources to generate to acquire user from these sources at the right price, because otherwise you can maybe have a low bid on this source without ROS optimizer. You can have a low bid on this source and you won't have the right eCPM to get impression and user on this source. But when you know the source level result, then you are able to bid accordingly to the LTV coming from these users from these sources.
Understood. So in a very, very subtle plug, I'm going to briefly ask you about the ROS optimizer that you've been using with AppLovin. Can you maybe take us through the last month or so since it's been released, and what impact has it had for you and your business?
Actually, we had a good experience with the ROS optimizer. This tool is powerful, of course, but it has to be cautiously taken. It's not like we want to have like the highest result of any time, like get the best user and the most qualified user ever. That's a risk with an optimizer, is to don't set up the right ROS target. For example, with AppLovin, we tried different strategies just to understand how the tool would work, and we started to work with like very demanding ROS, like we wanted to have the best users, and as a result we had very few users and very expensive, but they were very engaged, so they were playing a lot. But in fact, at the end of the week, it wasn't generating a lot of profit. At the opposite, we tried with very low ROS target, and then we had a lot of users, and it was very complicated to adapt and find and get some good result, because users were not really engaged, and on the long run, so even if the ROS target was respected, at the end it was the behavior of these cohorts were not exactly looking like the cohort we used to have on this title. So it was a little bit deceptive. So, but we learned something, that we learned that we have to experiment, we have to define what would be the best ROS strategies for each sources, for each game. And thanks to your tool, it was really helpful, because we managed to bid differently on different sources, at different strategies, and get different results. And now we are much more ready. We are ready to get some strong result with this kind of tool.
Understood. Okay, so as a last question, maybe as a guiding word for people listening in. So you mentioned this ROAS strategy. Obviously, it also kind of depends on when do you want to break even, when do you want to make your money back. Is there something that you'd advise to people when considering ROAS strategies for their own business? Is there something to keep in mind?
Okay, first of all, we have to always measure by ourselves also the result. It's really important to have the same metrics, start on the same basis. When we rely on an optimizer, it means the data is also there, but you have to make sure the data is correct on both sides. Okay, your side, the platform side. Then you have to go progressively, not rely exclusively on this and say like, oh, it's the best new thing ever. You have to pay attention. Look at your cohorts, see if your strategy worked. If it didn't, you adapt, you change it. That's something. It's progressive. It's definitely helpful, but you have to make sure you are able to measure the right thing, the right result.
Understood. Cool. So I think these are some pretty good words of wisdom to end the session. At the end of the day, that's what it is. You got to learn and experiment. So thanks so much, guys, for talking us through both sides of the business, talking about the reality of monetization management, what to look at. I think this was a very interesting, deeper dive than you usually get in one of these sessions. So I hope everyone who viewed and listened and enjoyed it. We'd ended at this point. I think there might be a Q&A coming if we still have some time for it. But otherwise, I'll just say thanks so much.
Thank you very much, guys. Thank you for your very interesting and thorough session. We do have a few questions, but sadly we don't have too much time left. So if we have anything outstanding, please join the lecture chat by the stream window and reply to all those questions. In the meantime, one question from Sai. What is the minimum maximum ROAS for 95% ad monetized hyper casual games?
So maximum, minimum ROAS. It really depends on your LTV actually and your overall strategy. ROAS is based on your overall, you have your overall activity, like from all different networks, and from and revenue coming from organic. Okay, from one network to another one, you won't have the same ROAS target because quality from users are not the same. So ROAS will vary up to the quality of user coming from the team of the networks you work with, and will also varies based on your strategy. Will you want to be profitable and take some margin for one specific network, or you want to be just break even because you rely on this to boost your organic? That's your call. It really depends on the volume, honestly. So ROAS will vary. There is no minimum or maximum. It will depend on your LTV, your CPI, how much you pay for it, etc.
Thank you very much. And one more question. I think it was addressed to Daniel. What's your advice on ad monetization setup and optimization for new games launched? What is the minimum DAU and ad impressions needed to make meaningful ad revenue?
Sure. I think Andrei and I, we can probably both answer this one. So for me, I think the approach, especially if you're in a bidding environment, if you have a lot of bidders that are running your traffic, then you don't have to set up much. Beyond that, there are some networks that, depending on your ad type, you should always work with. And I personally believe in setting up a rather competitive setup, which means that you have 3, 4, 5 calls per network at least, because you want to learn on these early cohorts, you want to learn what the potential performance is, so you can better assess the potential LTV of the product, whether your UA is going to be profitable or not. So I personally don't like this approach of, you leave everything auto-optimized around 2 calls and then you start building up as you get more impressions, because the data that you'll get back on the UA side might be inaccurate. That's my personal suggestion. Maybe Andrei, you might have a different take on it.
Yeah, I agree with you, Daniel, but we prefer to make as simple waterfall for the new games as possible. Obviously not too simple, because we need to measure like just at least the approximation of the ARPDAU. But at this moment, you want to measure your, say, impressions per daily active user to calculate the LTV, given that you can build the meaningful waterfall. And for the initial optimization of the waterfall, I would say that you need about 5,000 daily active users and about 10,000 impressions daily, at least.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you for joining us today in the studio. It was good to have you here. I know that there are more questions in the chat. Please join it afterwards. And by the way, guys, if you have any more questions, probably too shy to ask or don't have it formulated just yet, please direct message all the speakers. They'll be happy to help. I'm sure of that. Thank you and have a fantastic day. Hopefully see you very soon.
Thank you very much.
Okay,
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Have a great day.